Okay, we're going to take a look at the Scramble word or word scramble free response question from the 2014 exam. This is question number 1. I'm assuming that you've read through the question, you have some familiarity with what's being asked of you, but it's pretty important for part A that you understand the rules for swapping or scrambling this word. So the first rule says that you're going to go from left to right in the string as opposed to right to left. So you should be thinking, okay, we're going to need to make a loop where we start with index 0 and we'll go all the way until the end, which would be the length of the string. -1 is the last valid index. And what we're looking here is for letters of A. If we have the letter A followed by any other letter that's not A, then we're going to have a swap. If there are 2 A's in a row, then there is no swap. So we'll look at that in the example down here. Here we have the letter A followed by the letter B. Since B is not A, we're going to swap those 2 letters, and you see that they're swapped here as B and A. Down here in this example, we have 2 A's in a row, so the swap rule will not apply. And then the third rule of this method here is that once 2 letters have been swapped, neither of those letters can be involved in the swap again. So then you should be thinking our index is going to need to make an extra jump in the index to avoid swapping one letter twice. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with writing part A. Again, if you look at the method header, there is a return type here. We're going to return a string, and that string is the scrambled word. So we'll need to make a local variable here for, I'm going to call it new word, you could call it scrambled word, whatever you'd like, and that will just start off as the empty string. And then we're going to add letters to that, 1 or 2 letters at a time. And then after all of that's done, we need to make sure that we're going to return that string, new word. And that's incredibly important. There's always points on the free response rubric for returning something, anything, regardless of what you've actually written in your method. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. On the exam, I'd love for you to circle that, highlight it, mark it. Just make sure that you don't forget to return something, because that's usually a half a point to a point. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and we're going to try and process through this string from left to right, and I'm going to do that using a while loop while we are at an index that is less than the last index here. So you could certainly do this with a for loop. I'm going to do it with a while loop just to show you another way to do that. And as a review of while loops, you should have your loop variable declared before your while loop here. So I'll say int I equals 0. This is our first index or string. And then we're saying while I is less than, okay, the string that is passed to us that we're going to scramble is represented by the variable word. So while I is less than word dot length, and that's a method of the string class. Now here's where this gets a little tricky. We need to look at 2 consecutive letters. So if we have I is equal to 0, we're also going to need to look at index 1. So if I is 0, we'll also need to look at index I plus 1. And we also ran into this when we were working on the trail free response question. If you've done that one or not, you'll see this similarity here, that when you are having an index of I plus 1, the last valid index has to be 1 less than your last index to avoid an out-of-bounds exception. And for a little more of an in-depth explanation, I would encourage you to check out the hiking trail free response question solution video that I posted to the topics page. So now while we're working through our string here, we need to look at the first letter and then the letter after that and see if the first is an A and the second one is not an A. So I'm going to make some local variables just to make this a little bit hopefully easier for you to see. And I'll call this one first letter. And so that will be word.substring, because I just want part of that string. We'll start at index I, and to get 1 letter back, we go 1 beyond that. And then I'll need second letter, and this one will come 1 later. And now we need to check if the first letter is an A and the second letter is not an A. So if first letter, now we're comparing if two strings are the same. Strings are objects, so we can't use equals equals. Those are reserved for primitives. So if you're comparing two integers, two booleans, two doubles, but strings are objects, so they have the equals method. So if it equals an A and second letter dot equals A. Now keep in mind that this equals method returns a boolean. So if the second letter equals A, it's going to return true. But we don't want the second letter to equal A. We want it to not equal A. So if the second letter equals B, then this will return false. And then by negating it with the exclamation mark out in front of the not operator, not false is true. And now you'll have true and true. So you'll go inside your conditional. So if that's the case, a letter swap needs to happen here. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, we've kind of done some swapping with the selection sort, but since we've built an empty string, we're just going to add onto that empty string. And a swap really just means that we're going to take whatever the current word is and we're going to add to that. Well, first will be the second letter, and then we'll finish the swap by adding the first letter. Okay. Now, if you have added two letters or you've made a swap, keep in mind that the rules state that we can't swap a letter a second time. So this A is not going to get swapped with the R. Right? The A and the B have swapped places. This A will not swap again. So we need to move I, not by 1, but by 2. This avoids swapping a letter twice. Okay. If this is not the case, meaning we don't have an A or maybe we have two A's in a row, all we're going to simply do is add our first letter, and I will go up by 1. Okay, so this would be in the case here, your first letter here is E, your second letter is G. Your conditional evaluates to false because you don't have an A, so all we're going to do is simply add the first letter, and then we can move on to our next letter. So we have gone through almost the entire string, but what we haven't looked at is when I is the last index of our string. So right here, since we are comparing I and I plus 1, we've never looked at, or we've never handled this last letter here, A, by itself. So to take care of that, the very last thing we need to do is we'll just need to add to new word. And to ensure that you get the last letter, you can call word.length -1. And then once that's all done, we'll return the new word, and part A is complete. Now we'll move on to part B, which I actually think is a little bit easier. You're going to be given a list. You can treat this as an array list. You'll be given a list of strings, and you're going to need to call the scramble method. And if a word is not scrambled, like eggs here, doesn't have any A's in it, it's going to get removed from the list. So removing, you've got to remember that you either need to start at the back of the list and work right to left, or if you start at the front of the list and work left to right, when you make a removal, you're going to need to decrease your index variable by 1, otherwise we're going to skip over and leave off some words. Okay. We talked about that a good bit earlier in the year when we were working with array lists and removing elements. So I typically like to start at the back and pay attention to what the return type is here. There isn't one. And so all we're doing is modifying this array list that's passed as the parameter word list, and we're not returning anything. So again, I like to start at the back int I equals, so the name of our array list is called word list. To obtain the last index, we know it's going to be the size minus 1. So if this was a regular array, we'd use .length as a public field, but we're working with a list, and you can check your quick reference, but use the size method, minus 1, that's the last valid index. We can keep going as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, and we're going to go down by 1. Again, I like to start at the back when removing things, that way I don't have to include another statement to change my index variable by 1. So how do we determine whether or not a word has been scrambled? Well, we're going to assume that this method works regardless of what we've written in part A. Okay? Now, if you call the scramble method on the word eggs, its return type should be the exact same string as the original parameter. If that's the case, then the word wasn't scrambled and we know we need to remove it. Okay? So I'll break this down with some local variables for you here. So we can say string. The first thing we need to do is we need to look at the word. So we need to get it out of our array list. Get I. Okay. And then we can say another variable, which is we'll scramble the word. So now we need to call the method from this class. You could use this dot if you want, or because it's all in the same class, I'm going to say scramble word. And now what word is it that we're scrambling? It's the word that we just got out of our array list. Okay. So this is the word in the list. This is what it is going to be after we scramble it, and we want to see if those two things are the same. If they are the same, then we should remove it from our list. So if word, that's a string, to compare two strings, see if they're the same, we use the equals method. They're not primitives, they're objects, so we can't use equals equals. If that word equals the scrambled word, well then we should remove from our word list. And again, check your quick reference. What is passed as a parameter for the remove method? That would be the index of the element that you wish to remove, which is going to be at I. So this is a match. Okay. So if we have a word that is not scrambled after calling the scramble method, we remove it. But if a word is scrambled, we are going to, in fact, set the scrambled version into our word list, array list. So to do that, if there is no removal, then word list.set. Okay, the set method requires two parameters, the first being the index, the second being the element that you wish to set this index to, and that is just our scramble. And we are finished.